Morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Johnson. I'm a behavioural insights consultant. Thanks for the introduction there, Lewis. You're actually watching a recording of my presentation today, as unfortunately I can't make the event live. But if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please just post them in the chat and the Voicegate folks will make sure I get them and then I can respond to you offline. So I've been working with social housing and local government now for over a decade, looking at how we can use inspiration from the behavioural sciences to address some of the challenges that we're facing in those sectors. So I've worked extensively across income collection, channel shift, tenant engagement, but I've also worked across the gas access space as well. So what I'd like to do today is just to share a few of the insights that I've picked up along the way, doing that work and developing those projects. And one of the first things that I noticed when starting to work in this area was how the challenge is often framed wrongly, in a sense. As often we're thinking in terms of gas access being a compliance challenge and the legal imperative to get gas safety checks done. Now, obviously, there is, in some sense, that is the case. But ultimately, by hook or by crook, we're going to get the service done. But we're going to make sure that we're compliant. So for me, the challenge is more about efficiency and cost control than it is about compliance. How can we achieve compliance in the most cost-effective way possible? Because, as you know, the escalation process associated with gaining access becomes very resource intensive as we move through it, especially when we're looking at going to court, we're looking at forced entry, we're looking at capping off, etc. But then again, even earlier on in the escalation stage, sending all those stage 1, stage 2 letters does mount up as an organisational cost. And for me, this is where the behavioural insights comes in. So it's a question of how can we reduce the cost of being compliant by increasing the likelihood that tenants will be in when we turn up. So essentially increasing first-time access rates. So I said, fundamentally a cost reduction challenge that is driven by human behaviour. So as far as estimates from the AGSM goes, the Association of Gas Service Managers, failed access is forecast to cost the sector nearly £500 million over the next 10 years. Now, despite that scary figure, when we looked at the methodology behind that calculation, we thought that that's likely to be quite conservative because it only took into account the costs of the gas servicing team. Now, what we found is in reality, what happens when it comes to securing access is that the escalation activity tends to spider out across the business, involving neighbourhood teams, housing teams, tenancy sustainment, etc., and even down to the contact centre who will be taking calls to rebook appointments, etc. So what we did was undertake our own cost modelling exercise with a mid-sized provider in the northwest, and we arrived at an estimated yearly cost for that provider of over 385k. Now you'll see from the note there that's more than twice the estimate using the AGSM calculator. And the reason for this was, well, as I said, that the access activity tends to spider out into the wider business. So as you can see, when the cost is split out by cost centre within the business, we start to get a more granular but more accurate picture of the true cost of access. So as you can imagine, what was particularly surprising about this analysis for this provider was the amount of resource that is associated with the time that comes from the neighbourhoods team in helping the gas safety team secure access. And there's a reasonable chunk from contact centre, rents and tenant sustainability and legal also. So what we also did with this analysis was then look at how that cost was broken down across the escalation pathway. So as we can see, we're looking here at nearly 100Ks worth of cost associated just with escalation stage 1, given the high volume of escalation activity and high volume of failed access. And then similarly, we can break that down into what the unit cost is of each individual escalation stage. So here we can see that there's a cost of £32 every time there is a first stage escalation. Again, the same for stage 2, but then as you'll see, to be expected, the costs start to ramp up as we get through the escalation pathway and the type of intervention becomes more intensive. So I guess that then brings us to the key question really of what causes failed access. So why do tenants not stick to their appointments in the first place? And we can look at this quantitatively within the data, and we've also looked at it qualitatively through conversations and focus groups and workshops and what have you with tenants. So as far as the data goes, we tend to find that the population clusters into three main segments. So as you can see from the pie chart there, we tend to have a group of repeat offenders. Let's start with the repeat compliers here in green. So repeat compliers are those folks that are regularly in year on year at the first appointment, so first time access year on year. We've got a small hardcore but expensive segment of repeat offenders here, so the 4% there. So these are the folks that are repeatedly not just at first time access, but they're repeatedly requiring 3 or more visits in order to get the service done. And then here in orange, around 40% of the population are what we would consider waverers, because they're the folks that are sometimes in first time, sometimes they might take 2 visits, sometimes they might take 3 visits. So a range of things could be going on there. We're not talking about hard and fast behavioural patterns, but a range of kind of lifestyle and contextual things determining whether or not they're in for any one particular service. Now, when we look at the data points that kind of correlate with access, the data points that predict no access, can see from this chart here that age and employment status seem to have quite a significant impact. So if we're dealing with a kind of about a 60% average access rate across the population, we can see that this is varying wildly as far as age goes. So for under 30s, it's as low as 44% first time access rate. And then for at the other end of the scale, for the over 70s, it's as high as 82% access rate. And similarly, we can see some differences there in employment status. And as you can imagine, both of these factors are probably related to the likelihood of the tenant being in anyway. So the older you are, the more likely you are to be at home if you're not working. And similarly, if you're unemployed, the more likely you are to be at home. Now, what we also see is that arrears is a significant predictor of failed access as well. So here we see that the average number of visits on the left-hand side here required to complete the service, and across the bottom we see the state of the rent account. So we can see that with folks who are either at a 0 balance or are in credit, then the average number of visits tends to hover around 1, but then it goes up to as high as 1.75 as the visits per service as the amount of arrears increase. So again, I guess this is understandable as tenants who are in arrears may think that they're going to get chased for the money. They might be embarrassed that the operative may know that they're in debt, etc. Or it could just be behaviour associated with tenants who are generally less compliant or higher demand. So as far as tenant past behaviour goes, if you remember the segmentation model from earlier that covered the repeat offenders, the repeat compliers and the waverers. So amongst those who are at low risk of no access, the repeat compliers, access rates for those guys were as high as 84%, we can see on the left-hand side. But those who were at high risk of no access, so the repeat offenders, we can see that their first-time access rates are as low as 38%. So some significant impact from past behaviour there. We can also look at the impact of scheduling, and we don't see much difference there, except that when it comes to weekend appointments, the average access rate goes up from that 60-odd% to 88%. So now obviously it can be expensive to run a weekend service, but that investment, might pay dividends if it's going to have a notable impact on reducing failed access rates. So this then brings us to the key question really of how we improve access rates. How can we leverage behavioural science to increase the likelihood that tenants will stick to their appointment? As I mentioned, this is a behavioural question essentially at the end of the day. And this has been an interesting journey for me, because one of the key things we've learned from behavioural science over recent times is the extent to which the decisions we make and the behaviours we manifest or could be considered irrational. We don't always act in our own best interests. And as gas safety checks are really a clear case in point, in a sense, because we're giving a free service to tenants, a service that could arguably save their lives and reduce their energy bills. And still we're struggling to persuade them to be in to receive to see the appointment through. So a clear case of non-rational behaviour. Now, when we've applied these techniques in other areas, we've seen considerable success. The use of behavioural insights and the use of nudge techniques in some of the other areas. For instance, here in a context of income collection, we ran 10 randomised controlled trials with housing associations and local authorities across the UK and had some impressive results. So through the use of social norms, I'll touch upon that in a little bit more detail later on, but we were telling residents that most people in their area paid on time, and this increased payment rates by up to 9%. Using personalisation, residents who received a personalised message paid on average £30 more. Salience relates to how we can make communications more relevant and resonant to tenants. So here, 12% more customers who received an invoice instead of a standard arrears letter made a payment. So just reframing the nature of that communication. And just touch upon one more, the power of gratitude. So the impact that a simple thank you has on future tenant behaviour. So in this context, thanking residents for keeping up with their repayment arrangement increased successful completions by 19%. There's a whole range of nudges and behavioural insights techniques that we used through that project in the context of income collection. So what we thought we would do in that case then is apply a similar approach and a similar principle to gas safety access and explore how these techniques can be used to increase first-time access. So in line with the previous work, we redesigned a range of appointment letters to incorporate some nudge techniques and other behavioural insights. So we've got 4 different types of approach here that we incorporated into those appointment letters. One is just simplified. We've had some of our biggest impacts by just tidying up the design of communication and making it simpler to understand and to respond to. So this is a simplified version of the existing letter. We had a condition here that focused in on costs. So last year, tenants who missed their appointments cost us £203,000, and then suggesting that that money could have been spent on home improvements and repairs. So we called that condition costs. Again, we tried a norms condition, so 99% of our customers get their boiler serviced on time. That actually meant kind of within the legal compliance window. And then we had a condition that we called dedicated, which was inviting customers to ring in if the appointment wasn't convenient and change it to a time that was kind of dedicated to them, at a time that was most convenient to them. Okay, so as with the income example, we tried this in the context of gas safety access, but this time around, this is what happened. So what we've got here is on the left-hand side, we've got a control group. So that's essentially the existing appointment letter. And then we've got here access rates for all the 4 different nudge techniques that we tried. And as you can see there was no measurable difference between any of the letters we trialed. So the control group was at 62 with the existing, and then all the others were essentially the same. Certainly no statistically significant difference anyway that we could take as evidence of a causal effect. So the logical conclusion for us from this was that it's not the message necessarily, because we've tried all these evidence-based approaches. It's not the message, it's the medium. So it's the fact that we're sending letters. So even with all the evidence-based nudges that have worked well elsewhere, the use of letters didn't seem to have the slightest dint really on access rates. So as we build out this evidence base in terms of behavioural science and access rates, we'll start to look at how different communications methods as well as different messages can impact access rates. But what we do already know from other domains is that personal contact, so a conversation or a voice communication or a face-to-face interaction, is likely to increase the probability that a tenant will comply. So for instance, in the context of income collection, again, some of the work we referenced earlier, with repayment agreements, when a customer made a personal commitment to their income officer to complete that agreement, they were significantly more likely to do so than those who signed a written contract. So that personal involvement with another human being creates a different sense of obligation and a different sense of commitment. And we also know that in the context of GP and hospital appointments, if the service user is asked to physically write down the date and time of the appointment on a card, then again, they're significantly more likely to follow through and attend that appointment. So there are other tactics that we can try when it comes to securing kind of appointment adherence, but they do rely on us having a conversation with the customer rather than just sending a letter. So this then brings me to, I guess, the emerging area in this space as far as behavioural science goes, and that relates to something I refer to as the power of voice. So studies are showing that the use of voice communication can drive a range of benefits over and above the printed and digital text-based communication. So when people are listening to information rather than just reading it, it can be exactly the same information, but if they're listening to it rather than reading it, they're more likely to understand that information, they're more likely to remember that information. So again, you can see the application to gas access quite clearly there. And when we're talking to people, rather than writing to them or sending them a text, the information tends to be perceived as being more authentic or from a more authentic source. And there's a greater degree of empathy between the two parties. So, and ultimately that then boils down to the use of voice communication, resulting in greater trust and better relationships than it would be the case with digital text-based approach or the use of letters. However, of course, even if it was the case that we could reliably trigger more tenants to be in at their first time appointment, to stick to that appointment if we talk to them, if there was a strong connection with talking to customers and them being in for their first time access, it's obviously not going to be possible to ring all tenants to inform them of their appointment and then chase them up with a reminder. There's just no way that we could resource that sort of approach. So this then becomes a question of how we can identify the right method of communication for the type of customer that we're dealing with. Which particular channel, which particular message would be most effective with that customer. And then if we can use technology to automate as much of that communication as possible, then all the better. So for instance, as an example, if we go back to the segmentation we shared earlier, the repeat compliers, the repeat offenders, and the waverers, you could imagine a situation where perhaps a simple automated text message is all that's required to make sure that a repeat complier is in, for instance. But when it comes to a repeat offender and possibly some waverers, it may be that we need that voice communication or even a two-way conversation to solidify their commitment. And whilst that will be more expensive, obviously, that investment has the potential to more than pay for itself if it's going to successfully reduce failed access and all the resource that we've seen that goes with dealing with that failed access and escalating tenants through that process. And as always, if we can automate elements of that process, then all the better. So there we are, hopefully a few interesting and potentially useful things that behavioural science might be able to bring to the no access table. As I mentioned, apologies I couldn't be at this event live, but if you have posted any questions in the chat, then the Voicegate folks will make sure I get them and I can respond to you offline. So thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thanks for that, Stephen. That's some really thought-provoking insight there. Off the back of Stephen's presentation, I wanted to move on to talk with you all about our compliance service. Compliance is a critical function for social landlords. Ensuring the safety of tenants is the single most important objective which landlords have. This is why so much emphasis is put on the legislation surrounding the service. Failure to be compliant can mean that landlords face severe penalties. Voicegate compliance is a service designed to create engagement with tenants in the appointment booking and confirmation process. And by creating this engagement through technology and automation, we can help social landlords to maximise their efficiency and cost to serve in this area. When we developed the compliance service, we did so with the following objectives in mind. 1, support the gas and electrical servicing teams to remain 100% compliant. We recognise that most landlords are fully compliant, especially where gas safety is concerned. We wanted to take some of the stress and cost away from maintaining that compliance. Second point was we wanted to drive additional efficiency in cost and resources. We wanted to increase customer engagement and satisfaction. We undertook an insight project recently, which told us that the understanding of what comes next in the process is one of the biggest drivers in customer satisfaction. And we wanted to support our clients in getting that message to customers and improving their satisfaction as a result. And finally, we wanted to help our clients to meet statutory obligations using digital technology. Most organizations have a digital strategy, which is designed to protect staff resources from non-value activity. This service had to protect staff as much as possible whilst increasing customer engagement. And when we looked at the challenges which were being faced by maintenance and asset teams, we found that there were a number of conflicting challenges there. The first is the high number of appointments which needs to be scheduled. For our clients who have thousands and tens of thousands of properties to maintain, getting behind every door every year can be a significant logistical undertaking. Then manually booking all of those appointments can be a hugely time-consuming and expensive process. We know through the work that we do that it can take a substantial amount of time and effort to proactively engage a tenant in dialogue. And much of that time can be wasted in simply chasing a customer to answer the phone to you. But if you don't do that, if you don't manually engage, we see that the risk of no access increases, and no access appointments are an expensive misuse of engineered time and valuable resources. Finally, the white paper in November set out an expectation that landlords should be doing more to engage tenants in building safety. So we know that we're being asked to do more with the resources available. So in summary, we found that landlords were being forced to make a trade-off between the cost of contacting every customer to schedule an appointment and the risk of a customer not being home when an appointment was to be carried out. And then processes were being built on the back of that trade-off being the cost to engage versus the cost of no access. So from our finding, this has led social landlords to adopt one of two approaches. Where the risk of no access is greater than the cost of manually scheduling the appointments, landlords adopt what we call the consulting approach. In this approach, an appointment's not scheduled until the customer's engaged in a conversation and they agree a time and a date for the appointment. And this tends to be used in electrical servicing, where appointments can last 3 to 4 hours, and the resulting risk of no access is just too great. After all, a missed 3-hour appointment might essentially mean half a day of work lost. This trade-off can be taken as there are fewer appointments to be scheduled. So most social landlords have either adopted or are on track to adopt a 5-yearly cycle for electrical testing. So only 1/5 of all properties require a visit each and every year. However, this approach comes with its own costs. The outbound calling to customers is massively inefficient, means that a team of schedulers are required to spend a significant amount of time chasing customers to schedule visits. So what about when the cost of manually scheduling all the appointments outweighs the risk and potential costs of no access? Well, this is where we see landlords adopt what we refer to as the prescribing approach. In this approach, the appointment is scheduled by an automated resource scheduler, and an appointment is sent in the form of a letter to a customer without any prior consultation. This tends to be used in gas servicing, where the volume of appointments to schedule are far too great to consider calling each customer individually. Given that properties with an active gas supply make up around 4/5 of the total stock or more, That means most properties must receive a visit every single year. Since those costs are just too substantial to consider, organisations opt to suffer the cost of an increase in no access appointments, as that cost is slightly lower per visit than something like electrical, for instance. So we can see that there's these two approaches, each with their pros, but each with a substantial cost associated with them. So we thought, okay, what if we could lever our automated engagement services to reach out to customers and create automated engagement in the process? That would allow us to have the best of both worlds: tenant engagement, reduced no access, no need for inefficient manual intervention. So that's what we looked to do. We wanted to build that new way of booking appointments, which took all of those pros and put them together into a single process. So we had tenants engaged with the process. That was a key requirement. We wanted to reduce the risk of no access because tenants were engaged in the process. We wanted to improve the customer experience because tenants knew what was going to come next, and they had some degree of control over what was going to happen and when they needed to be available. We wanted to reduce the manual intervention in appointment booking because we knew that the cost of doing that was too substantial. And we also wanted to facilitate routes optimized to engineer availability because we just saw that there was a substantial benefit in having that functionality. So we built a new process, a process that would use automation at the heart to create that tenant engagement. And it looks a little bit like what you can see on your screen here. So when we look at the process, the start point is always the appointment cycle, regardless of what type of appointment it is. That's what drives whether an appointment needs to happen in the first place. Then the first opportunity to create efficiency is to use those resource schedulers to plan the routes based on engineer availability. The second opportunity to create efficiency in the process is to replace the outbound manual engagement with automated engagement. And this is where Voicegate compliance comes in. Voicegate compliance reaches out to every single customer by phone and text message and creates an automated dialogue with the customer, a message which a customer can interact with. This provides the customer with the clear message, but it also provides the landlord with the assurance that the message has been delivered, that it's been heard, and that it's been accepted. Now, within the message, we give the tenant the date and, where possible, the time or a time window for the appointment which they've been allocated. And then we invite them to either confirm that they're going to be available for that appointment, or if the appointment is not going to be appropriate for them, we invite them to transfer through to an advisor when the appointment is not appropriate, so that they can then reschedule that appointment to a time that they will be available. Either way, at this point in the process, we either have a confirmed appointment or a rescheduled and confirmed appointment time. Either way, the appointment is actively confirmed by the customer and the customer has engaged in making that the case. Now, on our side, we could take multiple attempts to engage that customer in the process. So the inefficiencies of constantly dialing out, constantly trying to reach out to a customer, we can take that on board because the automation in the system can do that. We get more than one attempt to reach out to them. And after we've done that, we can also continue to provide reminders closer to the time and give further opportunity to customers to reschedule if they need to. We know that the closer the latest intervention reminder was to the appointment, the greater the likelihood of a successful appointment being carried out. So by employing Voicegate compliance in the appointment booking and confirmation process, we can realize a number of key advantages. The first, leveraging the power of automation, using those optimized routes by default before inviting tenants to be engaged in their appointment, using automation to replace that manual intervention and creating that tenant engagement. We can better engage residents in building safety by communicating key messages around the importance of building safety to tenants through those messages. We've got visibility of the tenant engagement. We know when customers have heard your message and we can relay that back to you. We can provide timely appointment reminders with options to reschedule some of those essential safety checks. So the customer gets multiple opportunities to be reminded and to come back to say, actually that appointment needs to be moved, that needs to be rescheduled. And ultimately, that's about improving the customer experience. When customers know what's coming next, that improves the customer experience. If customers feel like they're being respected in the process, that improves customer experience. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're respecting the customer's time and their availability. We're working around them to make sure that the service works for them and for social landlords. All of this is designed to reduce the cost to serve. So we mitigate against the risk of the expensive no access appointments, and we reduce inefficiencies in the outbound calling process. Finally, all of this pulls together, and within the dashboards that are available, we can provide an effective audit trail which can show that you've taken all the reasonable steps to engage with customers and give them every opportunity to be available for those gas safety, electrical safety appointments. So thanks for listening to that. If you'd like to know more about the service, please feel free to scan the QR code that's now on your screen, or alternatively, if you want to drop a comment into the comment section, one of our team can follow up with you to take a look at your processes and specifically how compliance could help. So just to pick up then, notice we've had a couple of questions in the chat. So thank you to people for leaving those questions in the chat. I noticed there that we've got a question from Becky, who's asked if a tenant responds by saying they need to rearrange the appointment, does it involve a scheduler listening to the voice message or then calling a tenant back? In truth, Becky, the answer to that question is that we can tailor that solution around whatever the operational requirements are at your organization. So if you've got resources to hand like a contact center, we can transfer directly through to the contact center. If it would be that you need schedulers to make contact, we can record a message from the tenant, which would allow them to tell us what time and date is suitable for them, and then you can contact them back to arrange that with them. We would expect at that point there'd be a degree of negotiation with the tenant to understand what availability they have, what availability your engineers have got, and then working with the tenant in collaboration to find an appropriate appointment date. So I hope that answers your question there, Becky. Just for the final part of our webinar today, we were due to have Liam Gatens join us from South Tyneside Homes. I understand he has been called away last minute and can't join us. However, he has shared with me some of their key findings for me to share with you all this morning. So I'll be exploring these with you. Any questions which you may have for Liam, please keep putting them into the questions tab on the side of the screen there, and I'll be sure to pass them on to you. I'll pass them on to him, and we'll get back to you on those. Quick question there from James before we move on. Is there any interface with housing management systems, i.e. Capita? We can take feeds from any systems, so we can take a feed from Capita. It's just done as a flat CSV file. Most housing management systems, and Capita's not an exception here, can send CSV files out from the system in the form of a report. But we can also interact with other systems such as Corona, where we've got an interface currently in place that takes a feed from that system, where we can alert where our clients can alert tenants to advise them that an engineer is en route through our standard channels. So I hope that answers your question there, James. Bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to bring up some of the slides which Liam shared with me this morning for me to take you through. Bear with me. Here we go. So how South Tyneside Homes reduced no access rates and increased both efficiency and tenant satisfaction. So quick agenda for this slide deck. Quick introduction, why, we'll skip past the introduction since it's me that's going to continue on with the webinar, but why South Tyneside Homes brought in Voicegate for compliance, how they used the solution, what do the reports look like, what were the business outcomes, and who South Tyneside would recommend the solution for. So why South Tyneside purchased Voicegate compliance? The few reasons on there. First one being no access rates were a substantial cost to the business. Manual phone calls and letters weren't doing the job. They were still seeing a 35% no access rate. I think this was on electrical appointments. Tenants often need to rearrange the electrical safety check, but weren't sure how to go about doing that. I think that's quite a common challenge that we hear. Need to scale up electrical testing using technology rather than people. I think that you're probably referring to the point that South Tyneside Homes, when we started working with them, we were on a 7-year cycle. Their ambition was to reduce that 7-year cycle down to 5 years. So they recognized that they were going to need to be able to book a significant amount of additional appointments over what they were doing before. And Voicegate was brought in to help them to achieve that. 4 people manually calling out was not efficient, and they had a less than 50% success rate in reaching customers. And finally, tenant engagement was paramount. They really wanted to make sure that customers were getting a fantastic experience with the service that they were being given. So how South Tyneside Homes use the Voicegate compliance service. So every tenant who's due an electrical test receives a phone call reminder. They're given a call. We invite them to speak with an advisor. So the call goes out to say, hi, this is a call from South Tyneside Homes. We'd like to speak to you about your electrical test. And then it invites the customer to transfer through and be passed through to an advisor who can schedule that call for them. In the example that you can see on the side of your screen here, 81 out of 142 people listened to that reminder. And of that, 59 confirmed the acceptance or rescheduled the appointment. Of the remainder, 22 were unable to be contacted, and we left a voicemail and follow-up SMS to drive successful appointments. What that gave to South Tyneside Homes was a number of different outputs. What they can see is trends by messaging, so times of the year, number of calls engaged with. We can see all of that on the left-hand side of your screen here. These reports can be used for both electrical safety and electrical repair appointments. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be that it's used for planned maintenance appointments. You can also use this for call reminders for repair appointments. So if somebody calls out to say that they've had an issue with, I don't know, faulty socket, something like that, you can use that as a reminder to say, hey, we're going to book that appointment in with you. You'll get a reminder the day before, a couple of days before, to confirm that you'll be available for that. Now, this is the important slide. This is what did South Tyneside Homes get as a result of implementing this process into their processes. So the first key one that's good to point out here is that the no access rates changed dramatically. No access was at 35% for their electrical appointments before they implemented Voicegate. And since the implementation of Voicegate compliance, they've reduced that down to just 15%. So that engagement in the process really paying off there. Some fairly substantial operational efficiencies gained as well from removing the manual outbound calling. Prior to bringing in Voicegate, 4 people were making outbound calls to make these electrical appointments. It's now just one person doing that role, doing the role of 4 people there. We've also seen that tenant satisfaction has increased due to that proactive engagement. Compliments are up significantly and complaints are down. That's a perfect outcome from a tenant satisfaction perspective. You don't want any complaints, and you want to be able to hear that your customers are so happy with the service, they're giving you compliments on it. Engineer utilization and job satisfaction has increased. Ability to deliver against KPIs has improved. They're able to achieve more appointments without recruiting more engineers, as it is difficult to recruit at the moment. I think we all know that there's a significant skills shortage, and ensuring that by giving your engineers the right tools for the job, as you get a natural attrition, as people retire and move out of the sector, you're able to manage the workload with fewer staff. And the team are happy that we're supporting them by using technology which supports the digital strategy. So a number of really key business wins there. They're realizing the promise of Voicegate compliance. And finally, who would South Tyneside recommend this solution for? Anyone who's looking towards a 5-yearly electrical compliance testing service without increasing headcount. Any social landlord with Corona, as this works alongside Corona or DRS, as it used to be referred to drive tenant engagement, business efficiency. Anyone with a no access rate of over 15% for gas and electrical compliance, and anyone that's looking to increase tenant satisfaction. Again, unfortunately, Liam wasn't able to join the session today, but if you'd like to post any questions for Liam, please do put them into the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen there, and we'll make sure that we pass those on to Liam and we come back to you with an answer. So that's all from our webinar today. I hope you've all found that very useful and that it's given you some food for thought on new ways to do things in compliance services which can support greater effectiveness and efficiencies in your processes. As I've mentioned a few times, please do feel free to continue asking questions, leaving questions in the chat tab. And if you'd like to know more about the compliance service and what it might be able to bring to your business, please let us know in the comments and one of our team will happily be in touch. Becky's question there, how much is the modular Voicegate? Becky, happy to pick that up with you offline and look at it. We tailor it around the size of the organization. So depending on the need, we price it accordingly. Just give a quick minute there for any additional questions before I say thanks to everyone for attending. Okay, right, then that's all that's left is for me to say thanks everyone for attending. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks.